What do we I can go right to 7:30 if I need to. We don't have anything behind us. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard once again. College football time here at Awesemo.com. Ben Raza, Matt Kajeski. We take no days off. 4-game CFB slate, teams we've never heard of. This is prime to dive into all things college football, Matt. I know this is in your wheelhouse. This is some real shenanigans tonight. How are you feeling about some new teams on the slate?
Dude, my favorite team plays tonight. Coastal Carolina. A good showdown there. The FCS teams are pretty fun. They're really hard to project. We don't see a lot of these FCS crossover to FBS games. At least last year, we hardly saw any with the COVID situation. And as we saw in week 1, they're really hard to project, like Washington losing games, other games just straight up blowouts, like UAB destroys Jacksonville State. So you get a lot of volatility in these. I think it makes it fun for tournaments.
No doubt about it. One of the other things, a lot of people, if they're not watching the show, they're not going to know who these teams are. And certainly we've got them covered with our projections, your ownership, everything you've been doing. We got some new people in chat. Matt Giles joining the CFB grind. We love it. You came to the right place, my friend. We're going to get into these games. We're also going to get into prize picks. I do want to say our friends, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite prize picks plays later in the show, but I want to say this right up front. They are getting you guys started with another deposit bonus. You're not going to be dealing with the sharks and the optimizers, the mass entries, a lot of things the other DFS sites have. So all you got to do, you get started, you're going to pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board, and you're just going to go over under, just like a prop bet. If you correctly pick a 5-player lineup, you can get up to 10x your entry fee. They offer, it's not just college football. They've got NBA, MLB, certainly the NFL coming on Sunday. So you want to take advantage of that. Just download the app in the App Store or on Google Play. Make your first deposit. Use that promo code Awesemo, and you get an instant first match deposit bonus of up to $100. They also have another thing. As if that wasn't good enough, they have a free square that you can combine with any of your picks this week. All you need to do, Patrick Mahomes, over under a half yard. So if he can eclipse that, and I have a good feeling that he will, then you win. So no reason not to do that. We're going to talk about some of our favorite college football picks over on Prize Picks. I know I'll throw one out right now. I said this last week. I'm saying it again. Tank Bigsby for Auburn. Over 1.5 rushing touchdowns. He should have that in the first quarter. They play Alabama State. That is a creative school. But we'll get back to that, Matt. You mentioned there's 4 games on this slate. 3 of them are spreads north of 3 touchdowns. So I just want to ask you before we dive into the individual games, does that alter kind of your strategy when we have 3 games that might get out of hand?
It does, but in this particular situation, I don't think you're running the risk of anybody sitting unless things get truly out of hand. It's not like a Clemson situation where they're favored by 49. If anything, I think it just isolates where you want to spend most of your salary on these individual games. For example, the teams you're talking about with really high team totals, Boise State's at 41. You have Duke at 39.25, and then you have Coastal Carolina at 39. Those are where you want to be spending most of your salary on these marquee teams, and probably trying to stay away from the most part from your Kansases, your North Carolina A&Ts, your Uteps. It's only a 4-game slate, so you're naturally going to have to play some of them, but those are the Boise States are where you want to focus most of your energy.
No doubt about it. We're going to talk about the betting side of things too. I see some crazy hot takes in chat, potentially. North Carolina A&T plus 21 easy money. I don't know about that, but we're going to talk about it. So let's get into it. Let's talk your boys. They're up first. Coastal Carolina against Kansas, a rematch of last year. That first game, this was like, oh, it's an upset. Coastal Carolina won. We now found out that wasn't an upset at all. Coastal Carolina is actually really good and Kansas is horrendous. This time the lines makers 27-point underdog for the Jayhawks. They did win for the first time in over a year against South Dakota, but Matt, I don't know if they should be encouraged or discouraged. They won 17-14 and it was a pretty ugly game.
It was. It's really discouraging to me. This Kansas team recruits fairly well. I mean, they're a Power 5 team. They were the 63rd ranked recruiting class. That's kind of tough to see them at least that close to FCS teams. In South Dakota, they're a decent FCS team, but it's not like we're talking about someone contending for the title here. So Kansas struggling was pretty tough to watch. It's a spot now where they're not even projected for 2 full scores. Pretty difficult to get to a lot of Kansas. What I will say is I was pretty happy that they sent out Jason Bean at signal caller. I like what he gives them compared to their other signal callers. But the main thing with Kansas, they are fairly pass heavy. We saw last year, and to start this year even, they're going to be at least around league average. Their plays per game, when they are efficient enough, should be around league average too. That's enough to consider some of the other players, the wide receivers, maybe a running back in run backs to Coastal Carolina stacks. And that's really where I'm focusing my attention for this Kansas team. The only way I'm going to look at like Kansas stacks are in some of the larger tournaments tonight.
So yeah, let's start with the Kansas signal caller. You mentioned Jason Bean goes out there. Nobody was good, let's be real, but he was fine. He didn't get yanked. He can run the ball a little bit. He had 15 carries in that game. Again, pedestrian stats. But is that something that you think maybe can get him relevant just because he does have some upside with his legs?
For sure. He's somebody that I think you could actually use as a run back. Again, 4 teams, so we don't have a ton of options here. Being in your super flex could make some sense if you're stacking this full game. The 54 rushing yards are really what's most important here with Bean. He wasn't very efficient as a passer. And it was really interesting. I dug pretty deep on this Kansas team to see why they were struggling a little bit. Their offensive line actually protected really well. They barely allowed any pressures, but Jason Bean just couldn't help himself from taking off scrambling. Didn't really feel pressure very well, had 5 scrambles in the game. They didn't even have that many pressures allowed. So this is a guy that just, we like the running for overall his individual upside, but it raises questions for the team as a whole if they can kind of stay in the game. Are they going to be getting targets to their receivers if Jason Bean's just taking off? I don't think anyone was really impressed with what we saw out of him in week 1. I just like him because he runs.
I'm ashamed to say that I watched part of the Kansas-South Dakota game, and I concur. He was pulling the ball down pretty quickly and running. The other thing, though, that I want to ask you about, Kansas refused to abandon Gardner on the ground. Velton Gardner had 19 carries for 21 yards. That's not exactly efficient, but when you're getting 20 touches in a game, you're obviously going to be relevant. So what do you think about that? Is he going to be once again just completely stuffed by the Coastal Carolina front? Or are you saying, you know what, with that type of volume, maybe we could go there as a Kansas option?
Coastal's actually a team that gave up some production last year on the ground, and they're returning their entire team. So it's not like they can't do it. Unfortunately, the offensive line didn't run block very well. For the success they did at pass blocking, they were not a very good run blocking team, evidenced by Gardner's 21 yards on the ground, which is an issue. The main concern I have with Kansas themselves is we know they're going to be at least somewhere near league average in plays per game when they can run their own style. But Coastal is one of the slowest run heaviest teams in the country. They're just going to extend drives, depress opponent play volume. So can Kansas even get the play volume off to hit value in these situations with a 13.5 total? And then exacerbating some of these problems, Amari Pesek-Hickson didn't play in week 1. He was listed as the primary backup on the team. So they actually moved former slot wide receiver Torrey Lachlan into the backfield. He carried 5 times, also extremely inefficient, only 8 yards for him. But getting back Pesek-Hickson might be something to watch. We don't know what Gardner's role looks like when everybody's healthy. So we're already playing as a huge underdog, maybe depress play volume, and then Pesek-Hickson potentially coming back, squeezing touches. A lot of risks with him.
There is another guy on Kansas I want to ask you about, and Chad just brought him up as well. Trevor Wilson is the flat min on DK. He's 6,600 on FanDuel. It wasn't a prolific passing attack at all, but he did lead what was a garbage attack. He had 5 for 50 in that first game at the flat min. Do you need to go to him, or is it just on a 4-game slate kind of unnecessary?
There's a ton of value. I think you want to consider Trevor Wilson in contrarian lineups. That's a big talking point today is on DraftKings. FanDuel, this isn't as much of a factor. FanDuel actually has pretty efficient pricing today, but DraftKings has really inefficient pricing. So if you're playing optimals, if you're playing some of the better plays on the slate in large field tournaments, make sure you're considering how to be different, because you will see some duplicated lineups at the top. Again, 4-game slate, bad pricing. People are going to be funneled to certain plays. Trevor Wilson at that min salary is somebody I think people won't get to as much just because they don't have to. He's a good play individually, considering his price, led the team in targets, 28% of the team's targets in week 1, ran a route on nearly every drop back. It's just you don't really need him. So he is somebody that is playing a full-time role you could get to in a contrarian spot. I like him particularly if you're running coastal stacks, using him as a run back.
Do I even ask if you bet this game?
I didn't bet it.
Okay, I didn't either. I do like the under a little bit. This is pretty thin. I certainly don't love a lot on this card. I'm just interested to see who wins the tempo game, because as we go to Coastal Carolina, the thing that always stands out to me is what you already alluded to. They are really methodical. They like to run the ball a lot. They control these games, and it really shortens the clock. So there might not be as many possessions tonight. If Kansas can just not be completely abysmal, I think this game could be pretty sluggish. But talk to me about Grayson Mccall. Fantastic player. He leads this team. He can run. He can do everything. Where does he stack up in the options tonight?
Yeah, he's a great runner. We didn't see it in week 1 because we didn't have to. They played the Citadel at, near and dear to your heart. We saw Grayson
sweatshirt.
You should have worn the sweatshirt then. But McCall threw 20 times. On those 20 attempts, he somehow got to 262 yards. So just like incredible efficiency out of him in week 1. He's not going to be that efficient here. Kansas, even though they're still the Kansas Jayhawks, they're better than the Citadel. And Grayson McCall is not going to have this like ridiculous yards per attempt, but he probably does rush more, and that offsets some of the efficiency. Only 24 yards in the ground for him in week 1. They do run a lot of option stuff with him. They're not a triple option team, but that is a huge wrinkle in their offense. And McCall takes off running a lot. He's the highest projected quarterback. It's not really close. And with the other options on the slate, I think you just lock McCall into most of your lineups unless you're playing the extremely large field tournaments and you're just avoiding him for the sake of being contrarian.
Yeah, the raw points come into play here. Even if he's not extremely efficient, there's just, in a slate like this with only 4 games, he might be optimal just because of the soft pricing and whatnot. Are you okay, because he's such a reasonable option basically across the board, with using him with a running back, even though there's really no correlation there, whether it's a Reese White or Shamari Jones, one of their other playmakers?
Yeah, this is a situation where if the slate is just so small that you don't need to worry about negative correlation. Naturally, your lineups are going to take some on either way. So having him with one of the rushers, it doesn't make sense from a correlation perspective. But if you just look at the implied team totals, we talked about there being 3 clear teams you want to target. You're just going to end up with some of these runners and quarterbacks. And in particular, this particular situation, Shamari Jones and Reese White are 2 of the most underpriced plays on the entire slate. For me, just looking at the projections behind the scenes, they project as running back 2 and running back 3 in raw points. Neither of them are even 5K. They're the second and third highest projected runners on the board. You can play them both in the same lineup with McCall if you want.
That's what I was about to ask you. Is that the mega mind or with McCall? Okay, so I want to dig into that. That's very interesting. You said you're comfortable in certain lineups to play McCall and both of the backs.
Yeah, it's not only because they're so underpriced. Like this, let's dig into it a little bit. So Coastal Carolina, they passed last year 37% of the time. In week 1 against the Citadel, 42%. I imagine it'll be under 40% for the year. They're a slower team. You're not getting a ton of run attempts, but the fact that they're so run heavy sort of mitigates that a little bit. From here, they're huge favorites over Kansas, a team that allowed over 230 rushing yards per game last year. And then you just dig into the other options on the slate. Kansas, you have a potential timeshare with Velton Gardner as a 3-score underdog. We'll dig into the other individual teams, but North Carolina A&T, they use a committee. Duke has Mateo Durant. He's the other clear option at running back. North Dakota, Otis Weah is the only guy I think that might rival one of these guys in price. Utah State uses a 3-man committee. UTEP uses a 4-man committee. Boise uses a 3-man committee. So just like by process of elimination, there's really only 3 or 4 clear-cut rushers you want to be looking at on the slate anyway.
On the outside, again, we've already mentioned several times, Coastal Carolina, A, they're 4-touchdown favorites, so they're probably going to be running. B, they naturally want to run. But they've got a big-time tight end in Isaiah Likely. They've got another guy I can't even begin to pronounce. How do you say this guy's last name? Eli?
Highly.
You see, I should have just said their other big target, and then you could have said it and I would have copied it. What do you make of these guys? Likely 4,800 over on DraftKings, Eli 8K.
This is a situation where I think their prices should be a little closer. Highly at 8K is fine. He's their number 1. He's going to be their number 1 throughout the year. But when you dig into him a little bit, he's a guy. Last year, he averaged 89 yards per game. You saw him rack up 133 on just 7 targets in their first game. That's because of the efficiency McCall had. We already talked about 262 yards on 20 attempts. A lot of that was Hiley. Now, Hiley, that's still a 30% target share, but Isaiah Likely is a pass catcher who's been extremely involved in this offense at points in time too. So he's somebody I think that should be a little bit higher, with Hiley being someone who should be a little bit cheaper. They're both really good plays overall, though, just because you have a narrow target distribution between the two. And it's something that you can get to just based on raw points that these teams are going to score. I think your optimals probably have one or the other of McCall, Hiley, and then at least one of the backs. It's like a pseudo coastal onslaught. And the last guy I'll just mention quickly, their wide receiver 3, who's not getting any love, is Cameron Brown. This is your guy for GPPs. He only saw one target in week 1, but still ran a route on 70% of dropbacks. They're going to mix up their formations a lot, but Cameron Brown's the wide receiver 2. So he's out there. He's going to be a GPP consideration.
So if you do run some coastal straight onslaught, say you've got McCall, one of the backs, and a receiver or whatnot, or even 2 of the backs, can you run that alone? Or do you say, you know what, you probably should bring it back with Wilson or someone on Kansas's side?
I was running some optimals. A lot of them include 3 to 4 coastal players, no Kansas run back. For tournaments, obviously that run back is going to give you a little more correlation and a higher ceiling. So I think for tournaments, you certainly want to consider it. For cash games, you're probably playing at least 3 coastal players. At the very least 2.
A lot of love for Kansas in the chat. I'm really surprised. A lot of people want to take the points. I'm okay with that because, like I said, I lean to the under. So maybe it'll be a methodical game and the Jayhawks keep it respectable. That's about all I could say. I don't think there's any remote chance it stays actually close. Do you?
I don't think so.
No, it can't happen. Okay. We're moving on to where are we going next? We're going to Utep. Utep is just Utep. Boise State, the Broncos on the blue turf, total of 57, 25.5 point spread. Utep, one of the few teams that is 2-0. They took down New Mexico State, and if that wasn't bad enough, then they played Bethune-Cookman. So they have not seen a lot so far this season. This is a whole different test. Let's start with the road team with UTEP here. Like I said, we've seen them. They've got some players, but obviously in a step up in competition, what do you do with what you've seen so far this year? Because clearly it's not going to be that easy against Boise State.
No, not at all. It's easily the hardest game they've played this year. UTEP's an interesting team. They're going somewhat of an offensive shift. Last year, they changed offensive coordinators, so they move forward with Dave Warner, the old Michigan State OC. He's been more than comfortable riding the run early in the season, but they've been up in these games by a lot of points, and they're going to be down by a lot of points here if bookmakers are correct in their 25.5 point spread. With Michigan State, he was very influenced by game scripts. We have seen him take a pass-heavy approach. They're still running a ton of 11 personnel, so you have 3 wide receivers on the field a lot. Similar to Kansas, I think that makes them live in run backs. And I think you have a clear target distribution here that's interesting in these Boise run backs. Boise should be your second most popular team tonight. So you want to consider some of these UTEP guys in tournaments, but you're probably not looking at their quarterback, Gavin Hardison. He's still averaging just 217 yards, 20 attempts per game. He is a negative rusher on the ground, -3 yards so far this year, was negative last year. So he really has to get there with his arm. He hasn't shown it over the course of his career. The only really out I see to Hardison, again, if they're down a lot, they'll be throwing more. And Boise did allow 318 pass yards to UCF. Now, different animal, that's Dylan Gabriel. This is Gavin Hardison, but it at least opens the door to maybe there being some production.
Boise did lose a lot in that secondary, but again, it's such a class drop. And in that game, UCF was down 21 points basically immediately. Gabriel was going wild the entire second half because they had to play catch up. This script will probably be flipped the other way, but we did have a question from Chad, and it leads right into the skill position players. If you wanted to go to the outside, would you rather go to Garrett or Cowing?
I would go Cowing. Cowing had the larger target share last year. The target shares are very close right now. You have Garrett with 1 additional target compared to Cowing, but Cowing still has the edge in receiving yards, 181 to 122. And I'm just going to fall back on what we saw last year, Cowing as the target leader. He's the guy I prefer. Last player I'll mention, Tyron Smith. If you need a wide receiver super cheap and you don't want to play Trevor Wilson or maybe you just need a min price guy in this game, he's their wide receiver 3. And he saw a huge uptick in his role in week 2. In week 1, he only ran a route on 38% of 30% of dropbacks. And that jumped all the way to 85% in week 2. His targets jumped from 1 to 6. So he really became a full-time player in the offense. I don't think he challenges Garrett or Cowing for this role throughout the year, but it might be a little closer than the numbers suggest.
Backfield for Utep. There's a lot of guys. Ronald Awat, he probably has the first crack. He's the only guy that saw double-digit carries in both of the games. But is it just a situation where they're such a large dog that they may be phased out and you don't want to go there?
I probably don't want to go there. Awat's the guy I think you go to. Deion Hankins is going to miss the game. Awat's the guy that stepped up for 19 carries. Like you mentioned, they used Willie Eldridge and Renardo Flores. Quadriz Wadley got banged up. He's questionable for this game. Wadley was actually the guy that came off the bench second. Awat came in the game first. Wadley was second and then got banged up. And then you had Eldridge and Flores coming in third and fourth. Flores, I don't think sees any carries at all in a close game. So Awat maybe even has a higher ceiling just because they didn't have close games recently and he was out in the second half and they used him for 19 carries before that.
All right. To the other side. Before we do, though, as I say, I am just floored with the amount of dedication for these 4-game slates, for these small slates. Chat, you guys are amazing for showing up. I am going to ask, hit that like button. And certainly if you're not subscribed to the channel, not just this one, we've got the Awesemo odds and the Awesemo fantasy football. You definitely should do that, but hit that like button for us. Show the love for the blue turf. Why not? Everyone in Boise is very, very sad because they lost their first game. Not the best start to the season. And if you played them, you got what is the first of many trolls by their running back. So I want to ask you, what's up with this Boise backfield? Talani just doesn't play. Habibi Likio, the transfer from Oregon, is in there. Van Buren, they got a lot of guys. What do you expect tonight? Does he come back or do we still not know?
Yeah, how frustrating. And Halani wasn't like a really strong play last week, but I think he was a good GPP play. And he warmed up in that game. There's videos of him like running routes down the sideline, catching balls, full pads, doesn't play. And you see this in college football sometimes. You shouldn't have been heavily invested in him. But like if you were like me and you played him in tournaments, it did hurt a little bit. But it's the same situation tonight, except Halani, I think people are going to be scared off him even more because of the injury situation. He's more of an attractive play to me because you have concentrated ownership coming in on the coastal backs and Mateo Durant. And there's not many pivots. There's Otis Weah, and then I think it's Halani. And after those backs, you're getting to some really risky plays. So Halani, not only is he a pivot off Bachmeier and the passing attack, which is going to be very popular, but I think he offers some leverage off some of the other popular backs. You just got to cross your fingers and actually hope he plays. And again, he's been practicing all week. He warmed up for the last game. Suggests to me he should be active, but again, I'm not on the coaching staff.
So if you don't hear, if it's just the same thing as we kind of see from last week, you're willing to, in a portfolio of GPPs to go there because you think the potential reward is worth the potential of taking another 0?
I think it's worth it. Yeah. In tournaments, not cash.
No, definitely not cash, but in tournaments, I'm with you in that regard. Just that's my kind of philosophy in most things. You're really a lot of people are going to be apprehensive of doing that. And if you think you can get on a 4-game slate, that's going to be direct leverage on a team that is a 25-point favorite. It's not like you're leveraging with a made up player, but the backfield is a little dicey. The outside, I mean, Khalil Shakir was fantastic. He almost single-handedly at times won that game. He was impossible to tackle. They got a lot going on. They've got a lot of guys though, that receive targets. It's a pretty wide distribution. Do you think that will consolidate a little, or is this just how Boise's going to be all year?
I think Shakir is their clear wide receiver 1, and he didn't even have as big of a game as he could have. He only ran a route on 41% of dropbacks. It came out after the game that he was banged up in practice, and they were only going to use him in certain situations. On the 41% route rate, he still saw 7 targets, turned it into 91 yards. Like, imagine this guy's involvement if he plays all of the snaps. It's last year he had a 37% target share. Like, Khalil Shakir is the best wide receiver play on the board today. I think on both platforms. On DraftKings, he's not even the most expensive. He should be the most owned wide receiver, and it shouldn't really even be close.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's a guy that he's going to be popular. There's no doubt about it, but I'm with you. It seems warranted They are primed to put up a lot of points here. And this is a kind of a nice, could it get out of hand? Sure. But not all these, I feel like maybe this is just a me thing and everyone's thinking this guy's a moron, but to me, it's just like you see a spread and you're like, oh, 25.5, that's a blowout. But then you see a spread that's 45 and you think, oh, that's a blowout. Those are two drastically different situations. Like, I think it's very reasonable that Boise, they win comfortably, but it's not a blowout to the point where they take their foot off the gas. They're bringing in guys you've never heard of. And sometimes I feel like we lump all the blowout spreads into them, but 25.5 is not that egregious.
No, it's not. It's a team that got embarrassed last week. Like, I think it'd have to really get out of hand for them to take their starters out. And if that's the case, their starters likely had something to do with it.
Are you concerned about Shakir health-wise with the potential of a blowout? I would say no, personally.
It's like Helani. Like, we just don't know. I would say I'm less concerned with Shakir because he already played.
Yeah. Do you have, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little, but just to summarize it, and then we'll keep it moving. Where do you put the Boise quarterback in kind of your priority list tonight?
He's QB2. I think you try to jam McCall and Bachmeier and Cash. It's strictly based on team total too. Like, so yeah. Boise passed the ball at a 60% clip against UCF. That's going to come down because they're just immense favorites. Like, Bachmeier threw 39 times. He was inefficient, 263 yards. He can't run, but you're just dealing with a lack of other options. So Bachmeier, like, by default, is the quarterback 2 in ranking, and it's mostly driven based on that team total.
In cash, clearly, I think that's what you do. In tournaments, in a 4-game slate, do you have any tolerance for maybe just using one quarterback tonight?
I thought about this. I still say probably not, but I'm more open to it than I would be on most slates. I actually thought about it today.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, again, when I looked at the slate, I still think you probably want to find a way. Like, I would be more apt to get someone like Bean in there than not use a second quarterback and roll the dice, but it's closer than normal. That's for sure.
Yeah. And just a couple other players we didn't mention. The wide receiver 2 and 3 are Stefan Cobbs and Octavius Evans. Cobbs is the wide receiver 2, even though he's priced as the 3rd most expensive wide receiver. DraftKings, again, really bad job of pricing today. So in certain builds, I think you play both Cobbs and Shakir. It's pretty easy to fit them with the coastal backs there with some of the min price guys. Evans, I think, is probably your GPP play. He didn't run as many routes as Cobbs, didn't receive as many targets, but he's still clearly their wide receiver 3. The player I think that suffers from Khalil Shakir being healthier is your Billy Bowens and your CT Thomas. And in the backfield, like, let's just talk about this. If George Helani's out, I think it's a complete split between Habibi Lukoyo and Van Buren. If Helani's healthy, I think those two are merely change of pace backs. They're both horrifically inefficient. Like, Habibi Lukoyo, 23 yards on 12 carries, and he wasn't any more efficient at Oregon. He was a pure goal line back there, and he has never been efficient in his career. Van Buren functioned as the lead back before Helani at times, and he's been nothing but inefficient too. I think if Helani comes back, he sees most of the work.
Last question from this game. Would you be comfortable with going to Shakir and cash?
He should be like one of the first guys in your cash lineup. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Like, if you're not playing Shakir in cash, you should withdraw.
Or take your head-to-heads, correct? If you're not going to play him, go find Matt's head-to-heads and donate.
I'm not playing cash on DraftKings. I'm playing only cash on FanDuel tonight.
Oh, there you go. Go find it there. All right. Moving on. 2 down, 2 to go. I do want to say, we were talking in chat. We had some good questions about betting. This is such a bad betting card. Betting You, our exclusive podcast, is available on all the podcast feeds. You can also just go to Awesemo, find our podcast page. You can listen to that. We break down all the Saturday games, our favorite bets. I only am going to get to say this probably for one more week. Hopefully we could say it as long, but Matt, we are on absolute fire betting. We want to keep it going. We're doing the best we can. It has been a fantastic start. So come on there, join, get involved, and give that a listen. No reason not to, because free betting advice from me and Matt. It's been great so far. All right, here we go. North Carolina, the only time I'm ever going to say this, North Carolina A&T at Duke, 22-point underdogs, 55.5 total. We don't have the luxury. I always say, are they the Bowling Green where you just omit them from the slate? Maybe that's the case still, but at the same time, we only have 8 teams. So do you have to consider players from a team this bad, or can you still just say, you know what, I'm going to completely omit them?
You should not omit them on a 4-game slate, but they have like an offense that's intriguing enough, I think, to target. And for North Carolina A&T, it's going to start with their quarterback. This team is fairly pass heavy. They're slightly below 50% pass rate. They're not efficient. They only ran 60 plays against Furman in week 1, and they lost that game. But they had a couple weird things happen to them. Some players get hurt and get ejected. But Fowler's interesting because he's 5,700, and they are a balanced team. So he was able to rack up 268 yards passing on just 29 attempts. That's pretty efficient. Again, that was against Furman. Duke is better than that, but he rushes a little bit, 45 yards on the ground. A lot of people are going to play him, and I don't think you necessarily need to. They only have 18.25 implied points. Duke was bad last week, but again, this is a step down in competition for the Blue Devils, a big step up for A&T.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about this team. They played Furman. It seems like a pretty big step up. So I know you have to consider them, but really, like, how do you factor that in? It's such an awkward situation of you're looking at such a big step up for these guys, and they've only played one game. I mean, I assume none of them are going in cash lineups.
The only thing would be Fowler if you're trying to jam in studs. But again, I don't think you need to. I think some people will play him in cash, but it just comes down to, I think Bachmeier is much safer and they're a different price, but I would rather, like, here's something I was toying with. It's like, you can play Bachmeier and a cheaper pass catcher, or you can play like Fowler and Hiley. And I think, like, let's just use the Coastal 1-for-1, Bachmeier and Likely, or Fowler and Hiley. I would rather play I would rather play Likely and Bachmeier in that situation rather than take a guy in Fowler who has an 18 implied total. But that's a preference to me. Fowler does project fairly well for his price. He's easily the best quarterback in that range, and it's his rushing upside that gets you there.
There's just, I really believe when you have teams like this, there's a real chance. I don't think it's probable, but there's a real chance that North Carolina A&T does absolutely nothing on offense, and he's a complete non-factor, that they can't hold up against the rush, and he takes a lot of sacks. And even though he has some rushing upside, it's just not able to generate much of anything. So I would be I get the appeal that if you want to structure differently, but to me, the move would still be go get the 2 premier quarterbacks and figure it out from there in cash.
That's my approach right now.
All right. So,
well, actually, we should differentiate, because on FanDuel, pricing's tighter. I actually think Fowler's a better player over there because you have both Bachmeier and Grayson Mccall really expensive, and there's no real giveaways on FanDuel. So I actually think Fowler's a pretty good play in cash there, but on DraftKings, there's no point. In my opinion, some people will, but I would rather play Bachmeier.
Because there's not a huge opportunity cost to jamming the top 2 QBs.
Yes, but on FanDuel, there is.
Okay, fair enough. If you do use this guy, do you pair him or do you just run him alone and hope that it's a rushing upside situation?
It's a really interesting situation here. They're impossible to find injury information on. And I was really trying to dig into this team. They're missing Zachary Leslie, who played a huge role for this team in 2019, 42 catches, 652 yards. He didn't play in week 1. All I know is he's hurt. I don't know what with or for how long, but I presume he would be a factor if he's healthy. Just have no idea if he is. He didn't play in week 1, so that allowed Ron Hunt and Corey Banks each to catch 5 passes. Ron Hunt had a pretty good line, 146 yards. Banks at just 66. Ron Hunt is cheaper, so he would be the guy I look to. But again, very small sample we're dealing with there. Their best pass catcher was hurt. No idea if he's healthy. So it's like a really tough situation to get to. But I did build some lineups I liked a lot with Ron Hunt at 3,900.
And did those lineups have Fowler throwing him the ball?
No, they didn't.
Okay, interesting. So just kind of as a one-off, maybe in the Wilson range, you're saying?
Yeah, I think he, like on DraftKings specifically, he's a pretty decent look in like cash builds. If you are, let's see here, running a lot of studs, like you can get both quarterbacks in with him. You can really do a lot. So if you play a build like that, you end up with probably both stud quarterbacks. You can run Shakir, Mateo Durant, and then another expensive receiver. So Hiley, Thompkins, whoever you prefer. If you use a punt play like that, you can run 2 really expensive receivers. So in builds like that, that's where I have him.
On the other side of this game, obviously Duke is favorite to do some damage. They were in a wild game against Charlotte last time out. Little easier situation here. First question I have to ask you is Durant flirting with a lock button situation?
Yeah, you just play Durant.
Okay, so that's
he's
easy
efficiently priced on FanDuel. He's about like 3,000 too cheap on DraftKings.
Yeah, he's sub 7K there. That is even in tournaments. Let other people try to differentiate in that way. Just play him. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't. What do you do with Holmberg or any of these other guys, Bobo, Calhoun on the outside? Or do you just say, you know what, Durant is my focal point. I'm not going to mess around with anything else.
You should play Durant no matter what, unless you're just trying to be really contrarian. Like Charlotte kept that game super close throughout and they obviously won. So this is a big spread, 3 touchdowns. If Duke gets up a lot, do we see more Jordan Waters? I think you could play both of them in the same tournament lineup, specifically tournaments. Jordan Waters was really efficient on limited opportunities too, and he won't be owned. He's more expensive than the Coastal Carolina backs, which is mind-blowing. But again, this is tournaments where you need to think about where you're going to be contrarian. Gunnar Holmberg has a pretty good projection. And similar to Bachmeier, it's driven entirely by their implied team total. So he projects similar on like a scale to Jalen Fowler, but he's more expensive. He's on a higher implied team. I'm interested in Holmberg and I will be playing him in some tournaments. The issue is he's not very efficient, only 227 yards on 30 attempts. He's not a runner. He finished with -6 yards on the day. For Holmberg, I think it comes down to, does the step down in competition get him there with this implied team total? It's worth the risk in tournaments to me.
Would you rather go Calhoun or Bobo?
Bobo. Towards the end of last year, Bobo, he really emerged as somebody that was gaining more targets in the offense. And he ran the most routes. He clearly saw the most targets. He out-targeted Calhoun 9-4. DraftKings, again, just messed up the price. Like FanDuel got the pricing right this week. DraftKings, I don't know what happened.
An evergreen statement once again. Yeah, I mean,
Bobo, usually it's the other way.
Yeah, it is usually. Yeah, Durant and Bobo combined, 12K on DraftKings. That's more than reasonable. And I think you consolidate a ton of Duke offense here in a good game. So anything else to talk about on the Blue Devil side or in this game, or can we move on to the final game here?
I like Duke a lot for tournaments and not Durant. Durant might be the most owned player on the slate, but you have a huge implied team total. Everyone's concentrating on Durant. I think you can still play Durant and then get contrarian with this Duke offense in other ways. Like Bobo in his price range, I expect other players to be more popular. Holmberg certainly is not going to gain a ton of ownership, and he's one of the few signal callers that's on a huge team. I guess I should say a team with a huge total, and he's job security. As we get to Utah State in our next game, they have a team total above 30, but no quarterback security. So Holmberg is just, by process of elimination, I think, in play for tournaments by default.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's only 4 games. We don't have the luxury of being that selection. Tomorrow, when we're doing live before lock, you guys should be here. Saturday, of course, 11 to 12. We'll be talking about a lot of different options at similar price points. All right, we're going to move to the final game. But before I do, you've seen it, Nightbot doing the work there. We've got a promo. It's not college football, but I know you guys all love the NFL. Football's back. NFL DFS time. Awesemo plus NFL Express Weekly Pass. So if you haven't signed up and you say, I want to try it out, but I don't want to commit, but Awesemo plus Express Weekly is what you need to do. It's literally $1 with the promo code DAC for Dak Prescott, who was fantastic last night. Our Express Pass is bigger and better than ever. You're going to get so many of the tools, whether it's the ownership rankings, expert Slack, all the showdown content, single game. It is gigantic, and you're getting season-long fantasy football coverage this year. So you have so many things to do, and it is $1. The offer is only valid, though, through Monday, September 13th. So now is the time to sign up. Go and do that. No better time to do it. What else do we got here? Use the promo code. Yeah. That's good. No better time to do it. Promo code DAC, $1. That's all I got. Anyway, final game. Are you ready to do it?
Yeah, let's talk Utah State. I'm ready.
Utah State and North Dakota, FBS versus FCS. But hold on, inside of a touchdown spread. So this one is not expected to be a blowout. North Dakota is actually pretty good, and that's where we're going to start. They're on the road here. This is a playoff-centric team. You know, they did some things. They've got some guys returning. They know what they're doing a little bit. Talk to me about this team. Schuster, Otis Wee, as you mentioned before in the backfield. These are playable guys, are they not?
They are. North Dakota, They went 5-2 last year. They beat Idaho State in their opening game, 35-14. They're still taking a step up in competition. The line surprised me a little bit. I did not bet it because there's a lot of uncertainty in these FCS to FBS games. But if I was taking one, I would take Utah State. Like, Utah State is a program that just hung with Washington State last week. That was a single score game. It came down to a field goal. I think this is a situation where it's just a different level of competition. So if I was taking something, it would be Utah State against the spread. For North Dakota, they're an extremely slow and run heavy team. Their pass rate was 28.5%, plays per game 63. This team is going to pound the rock. So what happens if they get down in a game? You still have Tommy Schuster throw 29 attempts, 268 yards. I think Fowler is the better play between these two FCS quarterbacks, but Schuster does have some rushing upside as well, 27 rushing yards. Just for the sake of being contrarian, Schuster is going to get a lot less ownership than Fowler.
What you said, 28%? My God, that's pretty low. Like, did they run a triple option type thing, or they just run that often?
I've never seen them play, but I know that's their pass rate.
That is really, really low.
They may run a triple option. I legit have never seen North Dakota play, but they're very run centric.
Clearly. So does that put, where does this guy fall in the backfield at 5,400? Otis Wheat, like, is he tangential to the Coastal backs, or is he kind of firmly behind Durant and those guys?
He's behind Durant and the Coastal backs, just because Utah State is still a jump in competition for him, and he's more expensive than them. So he's 5,400. Like, he's nearly 1,500 more expensive than Jones. But on FanDuel, it's very different. He's a great value on FanDuel, 6,500. I think he's the best running back value play over there. And again, it's almost like you have to talk about these as two different slates depending on the platform you're playing, because the pricing is just so drastically different between the two. I think he has the second most locked in volume, but again, Coastal just in a smash spot. Overall projections, they'll favor the Coastal backs. But Weah, he should be the fourth most owned back. Where I start to get a little bit wary of him is, can I play Helani on a team with a much better team total at lower ownership than Weah? And that's something I've been wrestling with. So he right now is my fourth or fifth most owned back. I haven't looked since we just started the stream.
Not much on the pass catchers, right?
No, they actually targeted their running back too, Luke Skokna, the most at 3 times last game. But yeah, this is one thing I want to bring up. Like, the backfield is still unsettled. Another injury situation was Creighton Mitchell. He was injured in the team scrimmage and he didn't play last week. So I don't know if he takes carries away from Weah if he's healthy. I just legit can't find injury information on these two FCS teams, which is why they're so frustrating when we have them on the slate. But I still think Weah is RB4 overall on the 4-game slate.
Last team, we got Utah State, who, I mean, I didn't really have much to say about them coming into the season. Pretty good. You know, anytime you go to Pullman and win against Washington State, that's a decent little performance to start the year. Logan Bonner, Arkansas State guy, he's under center there. Got several backs. 3 guys had more than 10 carries. So you've got that. Devin Tompkins, 11 targets. What do you see from this Utah State offense? They're going to be in a serious game tonight. This team can play a little bit.
I like Utah State. They're a fun team to watch. They're using both quarterbacks right now. I think they're slowly moving towards Bonner, but they haven't quite done that yet. Peasley's more of your pure dual threat. He's going to get a lot of rushing yards, 43 yards in limited action in their first game. Bonner is their pure passer, and Bonner actually played well outside of an interception. He completed 71% of his passes, 143 yards, and he led them on that game-winning drive we saw in week 1. Their quarterback was kind of coy when he was talking about the quarterbacks. He said they're moving towards one of them as the starter. Based on the play, I think that has to be Bonner. But again, there's no security here, which is kind of tough because Utah State is implied for 32 points. You wish you had some security, especially with Bonner and Peasley both having mobility. They would be great plays on this slate if this was narrowed to one guy. And then the running back room, you mentioned it. It's really tough to get to any of them. Calvin Tyler at 3,500 should lead the group, but it's going to be a 3-way committee, and there's just better plays if you pay slightly more.
Is Tompkins a priority for you on the outside, or is he someone, if you get to him, you get to him?
I think Tompkins is a very good play. It's tough because you have Shakir. He's the wide receiver one. And then from there, I think you have to wrestle between Thompkins and a guy like Hiley. You can play two of them pretty easily, but you can't play three if you're playing guys like Durant and McCall. I think Thompkins is third on that list, but it's tough. He's a guy that has a great target share. He saw 11 targets in week one. Utah State's fairly pass heavy. They passed 44% of the time in week one, but this is traditionally something they do. And they're very fast. So Utah State runs a ton of plays. Right now, they're in a game that might see depressed play volume because of North Dakota. But Utah State overall, I mean, running 82 plays in the first game, if they can get up that kind of volume, there's a chance like Thompkins just gets there on PPR value alone. A lot of his targets are the low A dot variety, which doesn't lend itself to as many like big games. So I think in tournaments, you're probably looking to highly based on that. But Thompkins is in the conversation. I have a lot of builds with him. Whether I play him in cash or not has been a big point for me today.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, listen, he's clearly in play. He showed that last week and whatnot. So we'll have to monitor. The QB situation is interesting, as you mentioned. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left to lock. We'll get to a couple questions, but I do want to ask you, you've been doing some great VODs. I know we were talking about this morning for our friends at Prize Picks. And are there guys, I know we've got a lot, and we're going to talk about them tomorrow throughout the show. Are there anyone that caught your eye tonight on Prize Picks that you might have some interest in?
Yeah, unfortunately, these live before lock streams aren't the best for Prize Picks. Like we do these little Prize Pick videos early in the morning, sometimes days before the slate starts. Try to watch those because my favorite play, Shamari Jones, he's up to 77.5 rushing yards. I still think that's fine to bet, but he was at like 62 if you took this on like Wednesday. So you can get a lot of value betting early. For tonight's slate right now, I think some of the better values actually gone towards Reese White. He is the lower rushing prop for Coastal Carolina at 71.5 yards. That's where I would look among the running backs first and foremost. So I think taking a look at those Coastal backs makes a lot of sense.
No doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, even Grayson McCall's at 45.5 rushing yards. I expect him to be a little more active on the ground tonight. I don't mind taking a shot there.
For sure. And like, so the video we did on this slate, they've all moved. Highly, we like the under on 102. He's down to 99. Bobo was at 51. He's now up to 59.5. So if you want the best numbers on some of these, make sure you're looking early in the week. The last one I'll mention, this one's pretty good. For Utep, Justin Garrett is projected for 10 less receiving yards than Cowing. I think that's pretty close, but again, Garrett has the edge in target share right now. Those two are going to be very close game in, game out. So I have Garrett over his number, something I like still right now.
And again, get over there. No reason not to. I know, Matt, you've been saying you love the format. There is money to be made at Prize Picks. So use that promo code Awesemo. Take advantage of all the stuff they're doing, not just in college football, NFL, all the other sports. Get on over there. All right. Got a handful of minutes left. Take some questions for chat. Chat, put them on in there. You got questions, and you got to, there's a rule. You got to hit the like button. But if you do that, we will grant you access to Matt's Megamind genius skills here. Bachmeyer or McCall?
McCall. If you're only playing one, McCall.
Yes, I would agree. Talk about Jason Bean. We talked about him at the beginning of the show. I think he's an interesting tournament play because he's got some rushing upside. The problem is, A, Coastal Carolina, extremely methodical. B, Kansas is awful, and they're going to be trailing throughout the game.
One positive is Jason Bean has not been able to feel pressure. It's not good for the offense, but it makes him run a lot. So Jason Bean is a good GPP play. I like him in tournaments.
I'm also interested to see if they get absolutely annihilated tonight, how short that leash is. Like, is he just have free reign, or are they like, I thought he was going to get pulled against South Dakota. I'll be honest.
Yeah, that was rough. It was tough because like they've seen both of their backups too, and they're not good either.
Oh, no. It's not like they've got anything for the backups. I just thought they would make a move at that point. Question about Stefan Cobbs. What's your feelings on him for Boise?
He's wide receiver 2 in the offense. Very strong play tonight. I like Cobb quite a bit.
Fowler and Reese White. So the quarterback that's a mysterious guy, or Bachmeyer or Calvin Turner?
Fowler, Reese White.
Ooh, you're rolling the dice with this guy.
They at least are locked in. Like Turner's in a 3-man committee.
Do you almost have to play 3 running backs tonight?
No.
Question mark.
No. Like, okay, so there's a situation where one of the Coastal backs struggles efficiency wise. And maybe, so this is something we didn't touch on. Coastal's backs are very different builds. Reese White is a little scat back, a third down back. He's like 5'10", 195 pounds. Shamari Jones is 220 pounds. Like, if they don't have these long runs, if they get down to the goal line, Shamari Jones should be punching in these touchdowns. So if it comes down to Coastals at the goal line 2 or 3 times and they're running their normal stuff, like Shamari Jones could end up with 3 touchdowns. And that's a situation where maybe it's Shamari Jones, Mateo Durant, and then you have 4 receivers.
That makes sense. And that is an important distinction. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I forgot earlier. Sorry, guys. Shamari Jones is a lot bigger than Reese White.
Is Hunt out of play if Zachary Leslie plays?
I will say no. I just have no idea what their receiving order looks like. No idea. Yeah, like Leslie was a really strong player in 2019. No clue what they do now.
Thoughts on Coastal Carolina keeping the starters in to run it up? I just think they're, the game shouldn't get that out of hand. I don't really worry about them gearing down that much, especially the way they play. They already run the ball. So like they're kind of just running their same offense.
Agreed. 100%.
Riley Smith for Boise State stack ?
He's tough. They did not use him very much in week 1. Let me scroll down for a second. I will pull up his routes. I was really disappointed in his role with the team. So in terms of routes run, you had Cobbs, 85%, Octavius Evans, 61%, Riley Smith, he was 46. So his price, 3,600. I just don't love a guy that's only on the field half the time for GPPs.
Would you be comfortable running Grayson McCall and Jones with no wide receiver on DK and GPPs? I would.
Yeah, me too. McCall gets there on the ground as well, which could be something that happens.
Yeah, and that's how they want.
I think if he hits the ceiling, it's probably likely he does something passing, but in like cash builds, you could do it.
Would you rather flex Shamari Jones or Garrett?
Shamari Jones.
Cobbs or Wee? I keep butchering this guy's name. What's this guy's name on North Dakota?
I call him Weah. I've never heard his name pronounced. I have no idea. I have no idea how to say it.
Wee. Otis Wee. Otis W. That sounds cooler,
he's the preference for me. Otis Wee, Weah, however you say it, gets the nod.
Yes. And Carlos, who's already an Awesemo member. You got to be adding that Mahomes prop to any prize pick you're going with. Amen, brother. Absolutely do that and take advantage of it. We are not talking baseball on this show. That is sacrilegious, my friend. Any bets that you are going to make tonight, or are you just going to have a nice relaxing evening?
I may bet Utah State. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Luckily, they don't play right away after the stream ends, so I have some time to mull this over.
All right. A couple more. Need a wide receiver for 6,100 or less on FanDuel. Any suggestions?
All right,
he already has JSI Hatfield in that spot.
6,100 or less. I think right away, like Octavius Evans, the third for Boise, stands out. 61 is kind of a bad price point. Right above that, you have like Likely and Garrett. But let's keep scrolling down a little bit here. Man, Tyron Smith maybe for Utep. He plays a lot. Like his role as the wide receiver 3 for that team is locked in. He's 5,600. So you're going quite a bit below 61. But I would say either Octavius Evans or Tyron Smith.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, yeah, that's a tough price point. No doubt about it. As we were talking there, I know you've been scrambling a little bit with lineups. I bet the under 53 in this Kansas Coastal Carolina game. I just fired it. Here we go. So that is the only wager that I'm on. I may jump on Utah State as well, but I just want to say again, tomorrow we have so much action, Matt. I know your articles are posted, everything inside the ropes, awesemo.com/join. Get in it. There's no reason. There's so much money to be made with college football, not just on the DFS side, the betting side, which has been fantastic. You've got my articles. We'll be talking betting in our premium Slack. There's no reason not to join it. It is a great, great time here. So we have done it. We have officially done an hour with these 4 games. Chat, you guys were amazing as usual. Good luck tonight, and we will see you guys tomorrow for another college football live before lock.